Okay, welcome to El Maestro. You are with me. Thank you for listening to the third episode of this podcast. And once again, I have great content to give you. I'm thinking we're going to be pushing that hour again. And I know in my first podcast I had mentioned that we would go between 30 minutes to an hour, but that's when I had an idea of trying to give you 2 podcasts a week. And for now, it seems like it's going to be 1 podcast a week. So you can expect for these to be about an hour in length. Today is April 28th, by the way, and another gorgeous day here. Well, you say, of course, you're in California. But even in the United Kingdom, by the way, I have some subscribers in the United Kingdom. And so we will go back and forth with content in regards to sometimes it being more United Kingdom focused and United States focused. And we also touch international affairs as well too, because we are a global world now. And that's how it is, and that's how we're going to continue to present the news to you. But getting back to the point, United Kingdom is looking like they're going to have their warmest April in history. Well, good for you, Brits, and for my mates over there. I hope you're enjoying it. A couple things off the top that I do in every podcast, but just in case you're listening for the first time. First and foremost, sometimes I will munch during my podcast, so I hope that doesn't deter you. But if you hear some munching, that's me satisfying my appetite, or the cravings, as we shall say. And I may be drinking an energy drink, so that way then I can give you the kind of content that you deserve in these podcasts. Also, I suffer from ADHD, otherwise known as attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. What that means is sometimes I may pause during the podcast because I'm having trouble recollecting information, or I may actually reverse some facts that I'm giving to you. And if that be the case, then in the next podcast, then what I'll do is I'll correct it, I'll go through corrections. So, for example, today we have some corrections from last podcast where I had neglected to say some things, and so I want to go ahead and do that now. And this will be the top of every podcast, and it won't take up the majority of the podcast, but I just want you to know that I'm going to give you information accurately, precisely, information that you can count on. And if I do make a mistake, then I'm willing to correct it. I'm willing to own my mistakes. And again, if you feel that there's something that I did not present well, or that I did not do a good job in giving to you in regards to my opinions or interpretations, feel free to let me know. You can follow me at on Facebook, Victor Letcher III. Very easy to find. I think I'm the only Victor Letcher III on Facebook. This podcast is on Spotify and also on YouTube. So, feel free to react to me. But the first correction I want to get to is, on the last podcast, I mentioned that if you have stocks, or if you have your funds in Netflix stocks, or if your 401k or 403b or pension is invested in Netflix, then you're doing quite well because they reported well. But what I neglected to mention, or what I mixed up, is I said their revenue was set. They're set to increase their revenue by 2030. That's not very impressive. What I meant, or what I neglected to say, what I left out was their revenue is going to double by 2030, which is really impressive. The other correction I want to make is, we were talking about how Prime Minister Mark Carney, who looks like is going to be the Prime Minister again in Canada, the elections are happening now, we shall see, or they're tomorrow. Either way, he said that Canada's ready to lead, and I made a point of, if United States is going to take a step back, and they are going to be more isolationist in their foreign policy, and also their domestic policy in regards to these tariffs, not just domestically but internationally, then who is going to lead on the Western Hemisphere? and then, well, obviously Canada. But that wasn't really fair because there's a lot of countries below the United States, Mexico and Latin America. And I guess what I want to say is, and this is my wish, I hope in my lifetime I get to see a Latin American Union like a European Union. Because I think if that were to happen, and there's a lot of similarities, I mean, I'm sure you know, in Latin American countries. I mean, they all speak the same language, Spanish. There are differences in regards to dialects, but you could go to any country and speak Spanish. Now, of course, Brazil's Portuguese, so you need to know Portuguese. But the rest of the country speaks Spanish. There's a lot of similarities in regards to culture and food, and there's obviously differences which make each country unique and beautiful, but they have more similarities than differences. Very similar to Europe, right? The same kind of thing. They obviously are very different per country. But there's, I mean, even more in Latin America because they all speak the same language. I mean, in Europe, you have different languages. Although, if you ever do travel in Europe, a lot of people do speak English. But, if we ever did see a Latin American Union, I think they could lead as well, too. But that isn't the case right now. So that's why I said Canada. And then the final piece is I was talking about how a third party or multiple parties would work in the United States. And I mentioned how the Republican Party, the Republican Party of old, or the modern Republican Party, is really formed under Reagan. And I mentioned John McCain, God rest his soul, Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins, Liz Cheney, and other prominent Republicans right now who are not Trumpers, who are not part of the Trump base. Mitt Romney is another one, Senator Mitt Romney. But I neglected to mention George Bush and the Bushes, which is kind of a big faux pas because they also have had a big say, and they've had a lot to do with the formation of that Republican Party, which is now a wing of the Republican Party, because as we know, the Trump base, for all intents and purposes, have taken over the Republican Party. So that's it for corrections, and we're going to get right into it. But just one more thing. You may hear me refer to a former podcast. Those are podcasts that I did in the United Kingdom. I have not published them yet. I may not. But they were just test runs for me to see if I had a knack for this and I enjoyed doing it. And it was a yes on both. So I decided to give it a go. So I want to start with how last week we've been talking a lot about the economy and tariffs and how that affects your retirements, your 401ks, your 403bs, your pensions. 79% of Americans have one of those three. And it's directly correlated to how the market performs. And since Trump has been placing tariffs left and right with his tariff madness, his Liberation Day, the market has suffered, which means your 401ks, your 403bs, and pensions have suffered. Now, because of this, there has been pressures put on Donald Trump, or maybe people speaking to him in regards to the consequences of his actions, the ramifications that they're going to have. And he did a pause on his tariffs for 90 days, and the market rebounded. At that point, it was in bear territory, meaning down 20%. And then, there have been other things he's done. But still, this looming specter, or this looming forecast or future of these tariffs that are paused being put back onto the market makes it very queasy and uneasy. Because how can companies really project in regards to, they each quarter they go ahead and they give like their earnings report, but how can they project for future earnings report if they're not exactly sure how these Trump tariffs are going to end up impacting their revenue, how it's going to impact their sales, how are they going to be able to forecast future earnings when these tariffs come in. Remember, tariffs are a tax on the consumer. We talked about that already. So last Monday, it was another down day in the market. And it was looking as if we were going to have a down week. And what I want to bring up was it actually was not a down week. And you say, what? How is that possible? Well, again, there were some little birdies that got to Trump's ear, or there were people who spoke to him and was informing him of how dire these consequences were and how they were presenting currently, even with the pause that he had gave. For example, on Monday, the S&P's 500's performance was the worst of any president of that point since inauguration. Meaning that since the history of like when we were keeping records of this, the first 100 days, or the first the S&P's performance since inauguration, this current presidency, this Trump presidency, the S&P had performed the worst that it had of any presidency thus far. That's not really a statistic you want to have placed on you forever. You don't want that part of your legacy. The first 100 days is very significant, as you know, if you're an American. If you're not an American listener, it's a big deal. That was a benchmark that's now put on every president ever since Franklin Delano Roosevelt's administration accomplished so much in the first 100 days. So there was that looming over the Trump administration. And also, CEOs from Walmart, Target, Home Depot, and other large retailers met with Trump on Monday and painted for him a very bleak picture of what the economy, what the retail sector, the industry was going to look like if he did not talk about lowering these tariffs on China. As I mentioned to you before, we do a lot of business with China. And right now, we have a 145% tariff on China for everything we import. And a lot of these retailers, well, a lot of companies, just so you know, semiconductors, automobile makers, they import a lot of things from China in regards to their supply chains. So things may be assembled in the United States, but they're importing different products. We're a global economy now. So they painted this picture of empty store shelves in these big retail stores. I mean, apparently that also got him to rethink his position or make him blink, if you will. Just like when he was seeing the bond sell-off the day before he went ahead and paused Liberation Day for 90 days, his global trade war. By the way, the bond sell-off is still occurring. That has not lessened, unfortunately. But that there were going to be empty store shelves in their stores. I mean, that would I'm trying to give you an analogy of how incomprehensible that is. How unbelievable that is. That's like if you're living in Cuba, or you're living in a very poor country, which is Cuba, by the way. You go to the store and you may not get what you're looking for. It's not guaranteed to be there. So, I mean, the great United States was going to start being compared to, say, Cuba in regards to users or the consumers being able to get the goods that they want. That would have been a very horrible look on the administration. So, what did Trump do? Well, he said that, these tariffs are going to come down substantially in time with China. A complete 180. And we talked about in a previous podcast how this administration needs to do a 180 and quickly. And that he's not looking to play hardball tactics with China. Well, that was very good. When the market heard that, That was one of the catalysts for the 4 green days that we had in a row. And if you haven't looked at your 401k, you should go ahead and take a look, because there was a lot of the losses that we have endured due to tariffs. They were recovered with that rally. The other thing that happened, and I don't know how this happened, it could have been the same CEO speaking to Trump or someone else, but he completely shifted his position on the Fed Chair Jerome Powell. He had been talking about how he was going to fire Jerome Powell, not exactly in those words, but, if I want to get rid of him, I can. And that is really worrisome. And we'll get to that in a second, because we need independence of the Fed. However, what was good, and this also helped to give the market the rally that it was so seeking. It buoyed the market. The markets became buoyed with this news that Trump now says he has no intention of firing Chair Powell. Very good. Now, what caused him to do a 180 on that? We don't know. But obviously, people spoke to him and informed him how that was obviously rattling the markets, how it was bringing fear into the markets. And if that's the case, then you're going to see the markets suffer. And if the markets suffer, that means your portfolio suffers. That means your 401k suffers. It means your 403b suffers, and your pension suffers. It means your retirement suffers. It means your overall cost of living, your overall living situation, your overall well-being economically. But not just economically. It could also be mental health, because then you're worried. It impacts everything. So someone spoke to Trump, and he went ahead and changed his tune on that. And I want to talk about why it's so important that we have an independent Fed chair. Right now, I heard, and I said this in the last podcast, but I heard Chairman Powell speak about the importance of the independence of the Fed. And the one thing that he said that really struck me, and he said this when he was speaking at the economic conference in Chicago, or the economic club, in Chicago. And he said, our best thinking, or our actions, will always be determined on our best thinking. Not by the politics, not by who appoints us, not by, and I'm just adding things now. He didn't say this part, but not by political action committees, not by dark money, not by all the money that's floating to politics now. And this is why we need an independent Fed. We very well know, since Citizens United, and we spoke about this in another podcast, but since Citizens United and the other decision was FEC McCutcheon, how much money flows now in the political system. And how a lot of these politicians, when they get elected, even though seemingly they want to be independent, seemingly they want to do decisions based on their best thinking or on their ethics, sometimes aren't able to do so because they know how much money they need to be able to get reelected, or how one of those donors or political action committees or corporations, whoever will call them, and say, this will really impact us. We hope you will vote against this decision. And that politician has to sit there and think, well, I don't want to vote against this, but this huge donor helped me to get elected. See, the Fed doesn't have to worry about that. It's independent. And we need it to remain independent. Because that way then we can ensure that the corruption that's in right now in regards to the amount of money that's in the political system does not filter its way into the the Fed. Can you imagine if the president was able to fire the Fed chair whenever they felt like they were doing a bad job? Or in this case, how their policies are directly impacting the market negatively. And so they just want a rate cut to go ahead and to make it seem like their decisions, their policies, in this case tariffs, has nothing to do with the market in a downtrend. And of course, if the Fed thinks that's not a good decision, but is feeling pressured to do so because they're afraid to lose their position, they then are going to make a decision not on their best thinking and not on what's best for the American economy and not what's best for the American consumer or the American investor. It's critical that the Fed remains independent, especially in these times. So, I think that's the reason why we had a big green week. And I think there are other things that maybe got to Trump as to why, besides the CEOs meeting from Walmart, Target, and what was the other one here? Walmart, Target, and Home Depot. I think there are other things as well, too. One is Trump's approval rating in regards to handling of the economy was the lowest in his presidential career as per CNBC. There was another article by Yahoo.com saying that his tariffs are driving thousands of layoffs at U.S. manufacturing plants. Talk about irony. That has been a big part of Trump's political constituent base in regards to his support, in regards to the votes he received in his election. And now, if these tariffs are actually impacting those plants to where they're laying off workers, that might have been something else. All of these things together. I don't think it was one thing. But I do think the CEO's meeting with him and the prospect of his administration being known as the worst S&P performance in 100 days really shook him. Also, how much he talks about the economy. I honestly think President Donald Trump really loves the economy. I think he's really into that. In his first term, he talked about how they created the best economy ever. It wasn't, but it was a good economy. And how they shut it down because of COVID. So I think seeing the numbers that a majority of people, and this is not the first poll to say this, by the way. There have been other polls that have mentioned that his handling of his economy is not approved by many Americans. The other thing I mentioned, that the bond sell-off continues and our dollar continues to be weak. In fact, this past week, the pound soared, the Great British Pound, so meaning that people are putting their money in other reserves, in other currencies. This is worrisome. Remember, for as long as we have, since I guess the U.S.-led world order, since after World War II, the United States dollar has been the world reserve currency. And now gold is hitting highs again. Once again, if you switch to gold in the beginning of January, well done on you. It hit 3,500 for the first time ever. The pound is soaring. And the dollar right now, compared to the euro, is 20% poorer, is 20% lower than it was in the past 4 weeks. Meaning you've become 20% poorer with the amount of money you have as compared to the euro. That's See, all of these things, I think, really motivated President Trump to go ahead and do a 180 and a detour on his speaking of China. Because remember, he already did the 90-day pause on the whole world on his Liberation Day. But specifically on China. And also quitting his talk about firing the Fed chair, which is good. Now, this impacts so many things. And as I've told you before, I don't want to make this into a solely economic podcast. But the reason why I focus on it so much right now is because of how this administration's policies is affecting your pocketbook, your retirement, and potentially the economy. And I'm not the only one, by the way. If I was the only one ringing the alarm or the bell, you might say, you doomsdayer. But, I mean, I just saw something that came out today saying, again, and this is for, I believe, CEOs of major investment bank firms, but prominent people in the market are still saying, not just JP Morgan, as we reported before, but are reporting that 60% of them still think we're going to see a recession in the next 6 months. Now, the reason why it's 6 months, I think, is because of this 90-day reprieve we're receiving because President Trump paused Liberation Day. So that's why I keep talking about the economy. But, what I wanted to do is, as I did last week with putting in some headlines, because I mentioned in my podcast there's going to be some headlines about, pop culture or just culture in general. And I wanted to bring up this one. This is a good segue into what we're going to talk about next. And I want to know if you can actually figure out how this headline I'm about to bring up to you segues us into the next topic. But has anyone ever seen Woody Woodpecker? Now, if you're a Gen Xer or a boomer, of course you know who Woody Woodpecker is. This bird, I was watching it yesterday or a couple days before, has a really crazed look in the eyes, missing a couple teeth, laughing hysterically, and, maniacally punching holes or peckering holes in trees. I've never seen a woodpecker like that. So I always wondered where, the creators of Woody Woodpecker, the animators and the people who wrote the story came up with this idea. But apparently they must have at some point seen some, maniacal or crazed, woodpecker. I had never seen one until I came across this headline. And this is from NBC News. This is in Massachusetts, where they've seen a woodpecker who has attacked over 20 cars, breaking windows, no less. They say we seem to have a vandal in our neighborhood. More than a vandal. I mean, my gosh, what happened to this woodpecker? They're describing him as this 18 to 24 inches vandal going around the neighborhood, vandalizing these cars, breaking windows, leaving marks on the paint. What did they do to upset this woodpecker? Most woodpeckers go after trees, right? And aren't they trying to get food? I don't know. You could watch on National Geographic or on YouTube, but I thought like they trying to get food. They'd like some bugs in there and they put their tongue in there. Either way, I don't know why this woodpecker has seemingly been attacking these vehicles. I mean, are they Tesla cars? Is the woodpecker part of the Tesla takedown? Have they trained the woodpecker? When you see a Tesla, go at it. And the better question is, does that mean Attorney General Pam Bondi, will she be pressing charges on this crazed woodpecker? Now, I'm just joking. I don't think they were Tesla cars, but I'm trying to figure out why this woodpecker was so upset to go after these 20 cars. But, it wouldn't be that surprising if they were Teslas. As you can see, Tesla isn't really popular right now. And we said we'd give you the earnings report when they came in. And man, this earnings report was the worst earnings report I have ever seen. And I know for some of my listeners, this is going to bring, or maybe all of my listeners, this is going to bring absolute glee and enjoyment. What is that German phrase, Schadenfreude? But let me just give you these numbers. This is the quarter one 2025 earnings summary. Revenue was down 9% year over year from $21.3 billion to $19.3 billion. That's significant. But that's not even, that would be bad enough. I mean, you just lost 10% of your revenue from last year. That's a significant chunk. But wait for this number. Their net income from quarter one 2024, so from a year ago, was down 71%. Was down from $1.39 billion to $409 million. From quarter four to quarter one, so that's just one quarter, it was down 82.3%. That is enormous, monstrous, unprecedented. Now you know why analysts were saying they have a branding problem. Yeah, I guess doing Sig Heils and Nazi salutes, Elon, isn't helping your brand. I guess then going over to Germany and hanging out with the far-right AfD party isn't helping your brand. Now, for those who listen to this podcast, you may think, oh, you're just a lefter. You don't like Elon. That's not true. You could go through my Facebook. I have defended Elon Musk many times before on the left because, we have EVs now in the market. We've had the technology for a long time. But because of the fossil fuel industry, they did not want EVs to become popular or become significant in market share for cars. I could go on. I've talked about SpaceX, about how now we're doing space exploration again. But I cannot defend someone, especially as a prominent figure as he is, doing Nazi salutes. And not just once, twice. And then afterwards going to a far-right party in Germany, the AfD party. I mean, there are people already who didn't like Elon Musk, but I think like myself as well, combine those antics with what he's doing in Doge. And he forgot the first rule of owning a company. You got to make sure that the people who are the majority of your customers who are buying your product, don't upset them. And we know the majority of customers who are buying electrical vehicles are people on the left, center to the left. And this is horrible timing because now his competitors, I mean, everyone does EVs now. So, I mean, really the one thing he had was the brand, Tesla, and the supercharger network, but that eventually is not going to be that's not going to be the only charging network. It is right now. So the brand name is very important. And let me tell you how incredible this is. That now, as I'm mentioning to you just a little bit ago about how brand names are important and how it's the great thing about capitalism, that we have competition, and competition has caught up. VW has overtaken Tesla as Europe's top EV seller. That was never supposed to happen. Ever. It was never supposed to happen. That's a huge market. And I was seeing something else that said that in California, it's already down 15%. This is a big deal. And Elon says now he's going to take a step back from Doge. Seeing, different tweets and different articles, which are all, I think, kind of pieces to help rebuild his reputation. I don't know if it's repairable. Now, don't follow the stock price. the stock price, you would think the company's doing great. This is dire. I mean, and of course they couldn't do projections, because how can you do projections when your net income dropped from $1.39 billion last year to $409 million? I mean, what are you going to tell Wall Street? Where are you now? That's how much of an effect his antics, or his white supremacist Nazi antics, and the Tesla takedown protests, and people changing their Teslas or choosing to buy something else for other competitors, has impacted the company. They may have no choice but to fire him eventually. I think they're hoping that the next quarter will be different. We'll see. Just really quickly, the earnings per share were expected at 41 cents. They came in at 27 cents. Operating income down 66%. I mean, it is dire. It is horrific. So, for those of you who have been hoping that, people always say karma, that's what you believe in, or we could go into it more. But I think, for those of you who have been looking for some karma, or always think, all these, people, they act however they want, whether they're rich, or I don't just want to say the rich, I want to say the wealthy, or those who are evil. And I'm not saying Elon necessarily is evil, okay? So don't take it that way. But some people would say he is. I mean, considering the Nazi salutes. I'm not making that opinion. The point I'm trying to make is that it's good to see sometimes that people have consequences for their actions. And this is a direct cause and effect, a direct consequence of his actions. I wanted to, pivot from there to start talking about the international, because we've been focused on domestic. And I know you're probably saying, no, give us some more Tesla bad news. But I want to talk about some of the other things that this administration is doing, specifically in the foreign policy realm. And I wanted to talk about something that we haven't really seen in regards to the news lately, is how is the U.S. and Iran negotiations going regarding Iran's nuclear program? Now, we heard about it maybe a month ago in regards to Trump saying that, he was considering using military force, considering bombing Iran, how they have to be direct talks, even though Iran and the United States don't have diplomatic relations. So you can't have direct talks when you don't have diplomatic relations. I mean, I guess the way, for those who don't really understand this concept, I guess the way to look at it is when you don't really like someone and they don't really like you, you use a mediator. That's essentially what, the United States and Iran has had to do. But I wanted to give you an update on that because it's actually gone really well. So, I mean, again, I told you I was going to give you balance. I told you that I always hold everyone accountable, and I always give credit where credit's due. The administration, number one, they didn't continue the direct talk rhetoric that Donald Trump was saying. They went to indirect talks as Iran wanted. And that's being done by Oman, the country Oman. They've been meeting. They've met 3 times. And as of April 27th, which I guess was yesterday, they've made significant progress on these negotiations. They each have said that they want technical experts to draft a framework for a potential agreement, and there's going to be a 4th round of discussions scheduled for May 3rd in Europe. Fantastic. That's good news. And we don't want to get into a war with Iran, regardless of what Benjamin Netanyahu wants. I'm not going to say Israel because I don't think all of Israel wants to get into war with Iran either. They want their hostages home, FYI. But for some reason, Benjamin Netanyahu doesn't want to listen to his own residents, his own citizens, and is continuing the war in Gaza. But I told you, I give credit where credit's due. Another good thing this administration did, President Donald Trump has stated that he's not going to follow Israel into a war with Iran. Incredible. Fantastic. Now, he hasn't ruled out using military force if there can't be a negotiation. I'm not necessarily for that. No, I should say I'm not necessarily for that. I'm not for that. Because I feel like there can be diplomacy here. It's been shown. And I know, conservatives are going to be like, the first nuclear agreement with Obama administration. But the point I'm trying to make is whether you like that agreement or not, which was done by Secretary of State John Kerry, I believe. Whether you like that agreement or not, it shows that Iran is willing to do diplomacy. So we can work this out. We can figure it out. And I'm glad they're going to meet again. And apparently, the talks have gone twice as long as the initial meeting. These are being headed by Steve Witkoff, special envoy for the Trump administration, and Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, if I said that correct. I think I probably did more of a Japanese pronunciation than a Middle Eastern one. But that's fantastic. So well done. But, continuing on, foreign policy. Since we're on foreign policy right now, we're talking about foreign policy. I'm not going to give a well done on how the Trump administration is handling the Ukraine and Russia war. Not doing well in regards to trying to get a ceasefire. And in fact, honestly, I don't see a difference. There isn't a real difference between what Vladimir Putin wants in regards to a ceasefire and then peace, and in regards to what Trump is proposing. And here's the point I want to make to you. See, Trump said we're going to go with maximum pressure on Iran. He used that rhetoric. He used those hardball tactics. I'm not a fan of that, especially when you have a country that's shown that it can actually negotiate through diplomacy. But in a way, it worked. Again, he used hardball tactics against Canada and Mexico to get more commitments for security at the border. It worked. Now, unfortunately, in that case with Canada and Mexico, he went ahead and put the tariffs back on. I think Mexico has a little bit of a pause, but with Canada now, we have a trade war. Which was really odd, by the way. Just like on a side note, you very well know you're not going to solve the fentanyl crisis in 30 days. So, why put them back on? Both countries responded with commitments. And President Trump just went ahead and put the tariffs back on anyways. So why isn't he using those same hardball tactics with Russia? Instead, he wants to do, essentially Vladimir Putin's plan. What, is he like the ambassador for Russia? No, he's the president of the United States of America. So why isn't he acting like it? Like he's acted like it with Iran, and how he's acted like that with our allies. As I mentioned to you in other podcasts, with Canada and Mexico, with the EU. It's I'm befuddled. I'm flabbergasted on why he won't. He could increase sanctions. He could add tariffs. Instead, what he's proposing is that Russia gets to keep all of the territory that it conquered, meaning there's no impetus or no consequences not to do it again later on. It got 20% more of the territory that it wanted. He's saying keep Crimea. He's saying that Ukraine gets to stay out of NATO. And that sanctions will be lifted gradually. For what? For what? For just saying you're not going to attack for a few years? I mean, we've seen Russia's pattern. They didn't attack. They took Crimea. And they didn't attack for what? 7 years? And then they attacked Ukraine. They've done the same with Georgia, Moldova. We could go over it. I mean, this is a really ridiculous and embarrassing plan. It shows that Russia can do whatever it wants, and the United States, as strong as it is, won't flex any of its power, use any of its tools to go ahead and get a fair and just resolution for Ukraine. Now, I want to be honest. So we talked about who's going to step up in this regard. Well, the EU is stepping up in regards to what they want, which is, I mean, completely different. I mean, it's on the opposite end of what President Trump wants. They want Ukraine to get into NATO eventually. They want Crimea not to be recognized as Russian, and that the territory that's there is not Russian. The 20% territory that Russia conquered is also not Russian. It's still Ukraine's, even if Russia is there. It doesn't want to internationally recognize that. And, the question is, where do we find the middle? Because I can guarantee you now, Russia's not going to do that either. They don't want NATO on their border. It's very clear they do not. So it's not going to happen. At least not with this administration. Under this dictatorship. Under this autocracy. So I'll give you what I think should happen. This is just what I believe. Ukraine should get that 20% back that Russia conquered, that Russia has robbed from Ukraine. Roll back its tanks, roll back its people, and go ahead and move back to Russia. In exchange, Russia gets to keep Crimea. Now, Ukraine's not going to want that. But Russia has been there, my gosh, almost 10 years. That's going to be an ongoing war forever. So they get to keep Crimea. Ukraine gets to join the EU. They get to keep their military. They get to have peace forces there to make sure that Russia maintains the peace. And if after a while Russia maintains the peace, then whoever that coalition of the willing is can leave. Then all sanctions that are on Russia are gone. Completely gone. Now, why wouldn't Vladimir Putin want that? He gets Crimea, he gets all sanctions gone, and Ukraine's not a part of NATO. Now, if Russia attacks Ukraine again, then those peacemakers who are part of the coalition of the willing can come back and defend Ukraine to ensure peace again. That is a good middle-of-the-road solution. And I would ask that alligator Vladimir Putin why he wouldn't want that. Better economy for his citizens, for the people there. With sanctions gone, there's no NATO at the border, and you get Crimea. What does Vladimir Zelensky get? The 20% back that they defended so well. And Trump can't say it was, Trump can't say, or anyone else anymore, that was a waste in regards to foreign aid, which it wasn't, because now they get that territory back. They get to join the EU, and they have the peace forces there, and they have a security guarantee in case Russia were to attack again. That would be my suggestion. And I think that would go both ways. Now, do I think it's going to happen? I don't know. But we got to find some place in the middle. But here's why I don't think we will. Because Winston Churchill's already told you. You can't appease an alligator. And Vladimir Putin is fine with sending off innocent Russians to go ahead and die. And he could care less about Ukrainians who die. My gosh, it's 1 million innocent Russians who've died. Let's just say the same in regards to Ukrainians. That means 2 million have died after we've said never again. So Donald Trump, President Donald Trump, needs to go ahead and become or be as strong as he is with Iran and with our allies against Russia. If not, tell us why. Now he keeps talking like he's going to do something. But let me say this. I said this in the last podcast. Vladimir Putin doesn't respond to words. He responds to actions. He responds to strength. And we very well know Donald Trump is about action. So it points to something else going on here. If Donald Trump is going to lead the United States of America, then he needs to start acting like it. And not allow Vladimir Putin to dictate the terms of a peace agreement, which isn't just or in the middle at all, and is completely on the Russian side. I'm going to pivot again, but this is still international. I want to pivot to Spain. And I want to talk about, this was incredible. But Spain hit their first weekday of 100% renewable power on the national grid. Isn't that incredible? That means all renewable power was used, no fossil fuels. They did it with solar, wind, turbines. I mean, you can look it up. But all renewable power, first weekday ever. Fantastic. That is what we need in this climate change era. But for some reason, the Trump administration has issued an order to stop construction on a New York offshore wind project. This wind project was going to power more than 500,000 New York homes. And the question is why? I understand he wants to do drilling again. I'm not for that because I feel that we have to start moving. We have to start transitioning. My gosh, I mean, could talk about all of the evidence for climate change. I'm not going to do it here. But you can, it's everywhere. You could Google it. You can chat GBT it. It is a known fact. And we need to start moving to renewable energy. Now, I'm still the person who says, look, to power the grid, especially our grid, we need to keep using fossil fuels. That's just the way it is for now. But if we're not moving towards renewable sources, then what's the point? Spain is, and they're able to do their first weekday of renewable power. Fantastic job, Spain. Meanwhile, we're canceling a windshore project. Couldn't the Trump administration, even if they have more ties to fossil fuels, which is what I'm assuming is going on, can't they at least do it concurrently? Why get rid of a wind project? Makes no sense whatsoever. And, that's when another thing that's been frustrating about this administration in regards to not seeing both sides. You want to go ahead and oil drill? I'm not for that, but guess what? You got elected into office? Okay. Until that's what it is. That's how democracy works. But don't cancel a windshore project when we very well know we need renewables. And this is going to power 500,000 homes in New York. Speaking of homes, Spain didn't stop there. They're going to go ahead and invest $1.3 billion of European funds to boost the industrial construction of social housing. Incredible. Remember, again, outside of the United States, except for Utah, which we'll get to in a minute, and I don't know the laws in Spain, but I'm assuming if they say social housing, it's similar to social housing in the United Kingdom, where they have duties placed on local councils to house the homeless, and they get housed in social housing. This is not just affordable housing, by the way. So this is separate. This is for people who are on the street to get them housed because housing is a human right. I talk about it in my book, how I became homeless with a master's degree. And I'm going to spend the next minutes of this show, of this podcast, speaking about it because it's important. It's imperative. So they're using $1.3 billion to go ahead of European funds to go ahead and to create more social housing. They're going to create 15,000 new homes. Meanwhile, you have places like in San Jose, which is the heart of Silicon Valley, that have completely diverted affordable housing funds, thanks to the mayor. You also have in San Jose, but also in San Francisco, closing of parks where RVs are. So these were places where residents, and they're homeless, by the way, because they're living in RVs. They couldn't afford the high rent anymore. And so now they're in an RV. And guess what? They had a safe place where to go to park. And now they're being closed down. One of them is, in the one in San Jose, is being closed down for a new data center for Microsoft. A $3 billion data center for Microsoft. Now look, I'm not saying we don't need to build data centers. But here's what's really frustrating. We can build a data center for Microsoft, no problem, overnight. But build a campsite for the homeless to where they can reside until permanent supportive housing comes in? Impossible. Have a site for RVs, for people who are struggling with their rent and can live now in RVs? Nope, can't do that either. Now, why is that? Because the land is so valuable. So regardless of what these council members and elected officials tell you, they would rather have that land for a market housing prices, not for affordable houses, or for corporations. It's just the truth. I've been doing advocacy, and I write about this in my book. I've been doing advocacy for the homeless for 10 years. And that's what I've seen. Now, that's not what I saw in Europe. Well, that's not what I saw in the United Kingdom. They had duties placed on local councils to place them in social housing. And that's what I just told you in regards to Spain. But we don't have that here. Well, hold on. We know this works. In Utah, they decided to eradicate their homeless problem. They started in 2000. In 2010, they went ahead and they had essentially eradicated homeless. They had brought down the number of homeless dramatically. You say how? With housing first. Putting them in housing and having services there. Housing the homeless. That's how you stop homelessness. It sounds too easy, but it's true. Let me paint for you this scenario here in the last couple minutes we have. But these are some recent statistics. Millennials who were born between 1981 and 1996 earn 20% less than baby boomers do at their age. Remember, Generation X is the first generation to make less than their predecessors, which are boomers. About 50% of parents are still financially supporting their Gen Z and millennial children, about $1,474 a month. It is beyond challenging, incredibly difficult now to live in this area. We talked about in another podcast how Spain was also protesting for affordable housing. This issue of gentrification, which I speak about in my book, I say is the greatest societal ill we're facing now. So people move to RVs. And then what do? You say you can't be in this place that we've designated for RVs. People become homeless. They're living in a campsite. You can't be there either. That's not a solution. We need to come up with solutions, and we very well know what the solutions are. affordable housing for millennials and for Gen Z. For those who are homeless, social housing. And that's where we really have to focus. Now, the thing is that when I worked, and I'm not going to tell you who, and we're almost done here. I know I'm at the hour. When I worked for a Congress member, they went ahead and the staff there told me, Victor, we always have the money to do it. We need, but what we need is, we always have the money to do it. But what is lacking is the political will. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. I don't think until Citizens United is repealed that we're going to see any change in regards to the building of affordable housing in a way that addresses the crisis that it is, or to even start social housing. But look it up. Utah is the one state, which is, it's a red state. That's the one state, and I write about it in my book. That's the one state that has handled their problem by doing a housing first solution. That could be the blueprint for the rest of the country. Well, no, that's not it. I want to leave you with this one headline because we're at the hour. And I don't really know. This is not a pivot. I don't know how to really bring this up. But, we said we're going to talk about culture and pop culture. And Kanye West. And you're like, oh no. What happened? Kanye West was on Twitch. Now, Twitch is I haven't tried Twitch. But, it's a platform like any other streaming platform. Like, it's like YouTube, I guess, but a lesser YouTube. And you can, it's fine. It's made it. People know Twitch. But don't you think Twitch would love to have Kanye West as one of their content creators? The amount of people that would come to watch it, would be a big boon. Would be a big draw for the platform. So Kanye West went onto Twitch. He was on there for 7 minutes before he got banned. Is that a record? Well done, Kanye. You have the record for getting banned the quickest on Twitch. Incredible. I almost want to see if they have that 7-minute clip anywhere to see what in the name of sanity were you speaking of to get banned in 7 minutes. I don't have that information for you. Maybe I'll have it for you next week. Who knows? Well, I hope you enjoyed today's podcast. I enjoyed giving it to you. I will see you in a couple days. Until then, stay lit.